Thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I was just thinking about what Sam had to say, and it sort of got me thinking about what I was going to say here tonight. I read an article. Sam talked about the virtues that we need in a leader, and I think you nailed it on the head. And as Sam mentioned, I've been on his show several times, and he mentioned we had a hard time today. I was driving down I-80, and I kept dropping the call and kept calling back. Perseverance. You didn't mention perseverance as a quality of a leader, but we persevered and got through the interview, and it was a pleasure doing it. But the things you listed, the last one you mentioned, rang a bell with me, because over the weekend I read an article about the historian Paul Johnson. Some of you may have seen it. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and he was talking about how optimistic he is about America. He's a great historian. He's a Brit, and he was written one of the definitive texts on American history. And he talked about that he's optimistic because America will, in times of crisis, rise to pick a leader who has what he says is the most important character of a leader, and that's courage. He says all other virtues, even the virtues that Sam mentioned, unless the leader has the courage to stand up and do those virtuous things, then that leader falls short. So I just wanted to suggest to you that if you look at my political career, I've been very blessed. I wasn't supposed to win any of my elections. Most folks, if they were looking at the elections I ran, would have said, why bother? You were at one time 32 years old, only lived in the community. I know there's some Pittsburghers here, and I ran against this 14-year incumbent who had never gotten less than 60% of the vote and had no money, was outspent on all said and done over 3-1. It was a 60% Democratic district. It was a horrible Republican year. Our gubernatorial candidate got less than 40% of the vote. And yet I went out and I worked hard and we sacrificed. I quit my job. I laid everything on. I had a good job. And I quit my job, and I quit my job 2 months before I got married, and then continued, my wife and I, without an income. We went out and laid it all on the line because I was concerned about the future of our country. And we were blessed. It was a 1 in a million race to be able to win that race back in 1990. When I came to Washington, D.C., I came with the full knowledge that my seat was going to be eliminated in redistricting. We were going to lose 2 congressional seats. I was the only freshman in the entire class, so I knew I was gone. I was from southwestern Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh area. That area has been losing populations faster than any in the state. And so I went to Washington, D.C., and I said, I'm just going to do what I think is right. And one of the things I did was I found out about this little report that was issued every 2 years, always issued by the General Accounting Office, talking about how there's this account at the House Bank where members of Congress have checking accounts. And I knew about this because when I came to Congress, they said, you have to have an account at the House Bank. I said, well, why can't you put deposit my check into my regular account? Nope, it's got to be deposited in the House Bank account. And then you can write a check to your other bank. So it sounds cumbersome, but I said, if that's the way things are done, I guess that's the way things are done. Well, I found out a few months later when this report came out why. It's because members of Congress who have this account at the House Bank will write overdrafts. And in fact, some cases keep loan balances on their accounts, all at the House Bank. And I said, well, that's wrong. You can't write checks you don't have money for. That's illegal. You can go to jail for that if you're a normal person. And so a group of us, including a congressman from the other side of the state, Jim Nussle, who were both freshmen. He was the youngest member of the House. I was the second youngest member of the House. We stood up and said, this is wrong. And we went to the floor of the House and said, we want to do something about it. But we were told by all the folks, look, forget about this. This comes out every 2 years. There's one story and it'll go away. And Jim and I and a guy, you may have heard of his name, John Boehner, and 4 other folks decided we weren't going to let it go away. And why did people say, let it go away? It's because the most senior members of the House were involved in writing these overdrafts on their bank accounts. And we had member after member, including our leadership, saying, be quiet about this. Don't do this. You're taking on the powerful folks in Washington, D.C. And we said it's not the right thing to do. I had members of Congress, after we pursued this and we're getting toward the end, who came up to me in almost tears and said, if you release these names, I'm going to have to leave Congress. These are friends of mine who said, you just can't do this to me and to my family. I had one member of the Republican leadership threaten me. He says, I know what you do. We watch you. We'll get you if you do this. And we fought through it. People look at 1994 and say that was a great Republican year because of the Contract with America. Contract with America didn't come out until a few weeks before the election, and most members didn't even run on it. What was going on in 1992 and 93 to lead to 94 was corruption in the House of Representatives that we led. It was not only the House banking scandal, but it was also a post office scandal that led to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee going to jail. Who was the only member of the Gang of Seven who served on the Ways and Means Committee who fought to have this scandal pursued and aggressively pursued, while the chairman of the committee was the target? Me. I had to go to committee meetings every day that there was a committee meeting and sit right below Dan Rostenkowski, who was a bear of a man, a Chicago politician par excellence, and had to stand up to the people in power in Washington, D.C. That's why 1994 was a great Republican year, because we had the courage of our convictions to stand up to the people who were abusing power in Washington, D.C. Now, I was talking to your chairman here a few minutes ago, and he was talking about the positions that I've taken on social issues. And I talked about this last night. It's one thing to be a conservative. There are lots of conservatives in Washington, D.C. who go out and talk about the issues of the day, creating jobs, cutting the deficit, repealing Obamacare, all incredibly important, and I talk about it, and I talk about it with passion. But there are very few people who have the temerity to step forward and not just vote pro-life, not just vote for traditional marriage, not just vote for religious liberties and freedom of religion, but actually step out of the foxhole and fire the shots. And there's a reason for that. Because you pay a penalty, a big penalty, if you do. There's a reason that when I was in the United States Senate in 1995, there was a guy who brought forth this bill called partial birth abortion. His name was Bob Smith from New Hampshire. And we passed the bill, it was vetoed by the president, and in 1996, in the fall of 96, an election year, the bill came up for the override of the president's veto. Bob Smith, who was running for re-election in New Hampshire, said, I'm not going to touch this bill right before the election. There's one thing for me to lead, but I'm not going to lead when my political seat is on the line. So he stepped down. And he asked, who will step forward? Who will step forward to lead? Well, I was a freshman member. I'd only been there a year and a half. I said, who will step forward to lead on this? Nobody did. Not a single member of the United States Senate wanted to take this bill. Well, through some things that happened in my life, I always tell people that, believe it or not, I went to the United States Senate and I found God. I'd always been a person of faith, but when I came to the Senate, it was a job that made me think more about why did God put a 36-year-old man who was always on the move, busy trying to make a difference. Why did he put me here? And I prayed a lot about it, and I realized that this was why I was here. I was here to follow his call to defend these little children who were being brutalized through this procedure. And so I stepped forward. I didn't realize I knew that coming out on the issue of abortion would be a tough thing. I didn't realize it would be as tough as it is.